Hey, my friends, thank you to all of my new subscribers. Your support, comments, and engagement are exactly why I created this channel. I'm just so excited to create a community where we as true crime lovers can come together, share our opinions, whether we agree or disagree. Your opinions and thoughts are definitely respected. Because of the interest and engagement that you all showed in part one of Women Serving Life in Mississippi, I'm bringing you part two. I hope you all enjoy and engage just as much as you did in part one here on part two. And I hope to see some newcomers, new subscribers. So don't be shy. Drop your opinions in the comment section. If you have any case suggestions, you can drop those too. I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope you stick around. Turn those notifications on so that you don't miss what Anna B has coming from behind them walls. Thank you. Enjoy the video.
Vickie Swinney and her brother Nicholas Swinney went into Don's pawn shop at about 2:15 p.m. on November 17, 1997. The owner, Don Harville, was present along with two customers. About 20 minutes after the siblings entered the shop, the two customers left, leaving only Vickie, Nicholas, and Don alone. Later, one of the customers identified the heavier, shorter sibling as Vickie and the taller one as Nicholas. Vickie handed Don 2 rings to pawn. As Don turned around to weigh the rings, Vickie pulled out a pistol and shot Mr. Don in his back. Another customer, William Morrison, then entered the store and saw Don laying on the floor, holding his chest. As William tried calling 911, he heard a pow! He realized it was gunfire as he ran for the door he was shot from behind, falling out of the doorway. One person ran from the store, jumping over him, and a second heavy-set person came out and stepped over him. Mr. William managed to crawl to the passenger side of his car, and as he looked up, the second person that had run out, the heavier set of the two, had got to the car and saw him still moving. She reached into the car and pulled out a pistol. William said that the man ran into the street and another shot was fired. Other witnesses contradicted the version of events after William was shot. 2 other witnesses testified that William exited the store and a slender black man ran past him. They said that the man with the gun saw William moving and turned back toward him. As the gunman pointed his weapon at William, the 2 witnesses backed their car between them in an attempt to protect William. The slender man ran to the passenger side of his own vehicle as the heavy-set person was backing it up. The male witness stated without a doubt that the person outside the pawn shop with the gun was not Vickie Swinney. Police arrested Vickie and Nicholas at a roadblock. A Glock 9mm pistol was found on the ground near the passenger side of the car, and a clip was found where Nicholas had been sitting in the car. At the jail, an officer found 2 9mm bullets in Vickie's pocket. Captain Billy Clyde Burns interviewed Vickie around 5 p.m. that same day. Vickie said that she went to pawn 2 rings and that Don offered her $30 for them. She claimed that Nicholas was the gunman and that she did not fire a gun. She also stated that she left the store before Nicholas and was walking to her car when William was shot. Captain Burns informed her that a gunshot residue kit would conclusively determine where she had fired a gun recently. She claimed to have fired a toy gun, which pops like a real gun but has a dart in it. When the captain told Vickie that a toy gun would not account for gunshot residue, she changed her story and said that she did fire a gun that day. She said that she was at her friend's house when another friend had a gun that was jammed. She said that she took the gun, squeezed it, and it went off, putting a hole in the wall or ceiling. Her friend later testified at trial that there was no gun that had been fired in her house that day, and she did not see Vickie with a gun. She also testified that Vickie said she was unhappy and needed money. 9 a.m. on November 19, 1997, an investigator for the district attorney's office, Ralph Dance, confronted Vickie about her previous statements. She then said that she was talking to Don about pawning the rings. When he turned to weigh the rings, she pulled the gun out, but it was jammed. When she attempted to unjam the gun, it went off and shot Don in the back. She was convicted of the capital murder of Mr. Thomas Don Harville, based on the underlying felony of robbery, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was also convicted of the aggravated assault of William Morrison and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, with both sentences to be served consecutively. Natchez police got a call regarding an assault at 573 West Stiers Lane on July 7, 1999, around 2:15 a.m. When responding officers arrived at the boarding house, Brenda and a man directed them to the room where the assault occurred. The one-bedroom apartment in the boarding house belonged to Larry Holliday, who was later determined to be the deceased victim. The apartment door was cracked open. When one of the officers looked inside Holliday's apartment, he discovered 2 legs behind the door lying on the floor. The officers pushed open the door and went inside. Officer Hewitt discovered what appeared to be a bullet wound. Officer Hewitt checked Holliday for vital signs, but he did not find any or a pulse. Brenda, who was standing behind the officers outside the room, was visibly upset and tried to enter the room. Officer Hewitt instructed Officer Belling to remove Reynolds. Officer Belling testified that he exited the boarding house and stayed on the front porch with Reynolds until she was taken by Officer Don Boyd to the Natchez Police Department. While on the front porch, Officer Belling testified that Reynolds explained why she was upset and crying. According to Officer Belling, Brenda told him that she had gone to Holliday's house to retrieve a black leather hat. When they got to Holliday's house, she walked up the steps first, with Holliday following her. She entered Holliday's room first. When Holliday followed her inside and began to shut the door, she heard a loud bang. Holliday yelled her name and fell to the floor. Brenda was transported to the police department. She reportedly had blood spots on the white skirt that she was wearing. Brenda was interviewed at 4:57 a.m. Brenda stated that she and Larry had gone to his apartment. Larry closed the apartment door. She then heard a noise. The victim called her name and fell to the floor. Investigator Nations testified that Brenda was questioned extensively about anyone else being present. She stated that she and Larry were the only 2 in the apartment, and no one else was present anywhere in that area. Investigator Nations testified that Brenda's clothes and shoes appeared to have blood on them. Brenda also had a scratch on her face. She stated that she was not sure how she got the scratch on her face, but Larry might have scratched her when he was falling and reached out for her. Brenda stated that she got scared and left the apartment and went to a trailer at 618 Inez Street. She stated that she called her mother, and her mother and sister came to her at the trailer. When her mother and sister arrived, they went to see Larry. Her mother and sister returned to the trailer and called the police. Brenda demanded that Captain Mullins do a gunshot residue test on her. When investigator Butler came back with a gunshot residue test kit, Brenda refused. However, the sample was taken. A forensic scientist with the Mississippi Crime Laboratory examined a standard gunshot residue evidence collection taken from Brenda, analyzing the 4 vials contained inside the gunshot residue test kit. From the testing, a positive identification of 1 particle of gunshot residue on her right palm, particles of gunshot residue on her left palm, and 1 particle characteristic of gunshot residue on the back of Brenda's right hand. The 1 particle on the right palm and the particles on the left palm met all the characteristics of gunshot residue and was positively identified as gunshot residue. Brenda Louise Reynolds was indicted on the charge of murder in Adams County, Mississippi. The autopsy completed on Larry determined he sustained a gunshot to the mid-chest area that did not exit his body. The wound indicated that he was shot from a very close range. A barrel indent impression on Larry's chest was evidence that the gun was in contact with his skin. He was also shot in the leg below his right knee. A 3rd wound in his left elbow, which also appeared to have been in close range. Assistant District Attorney Vincent Davis said Brenda confessed the murder to Vifren Carter, a jailmate at the Natchez City Jail, after she was incarcerated. Reynolds is believed to have told Carter she was tired of Larry messing with her and following her around. After an objection from Brenda's defense team and a long conversation in chambers, it was decided that Vifren Carter would not testify. Brenda was tried and found guilty of murder by a jury and sentenced to life imprisonment in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. 75-year-old Odon Loper, a retired barber, lived alone in a small house in Macomb, Mississippi. His health was deteriorating, and he required the use of oxygen to breathe. Loper had no family, but he had friends whom he treated like family, including Diane Bryant and Chastity Petrus, Diane's first cousin. Diane was married to James Bryant and was living in Bay Street, Lewis, in 1996. While James worked offshore, Diane had an affair with Michael Northup. In the summer of 1996, 15-year-old Chastity and her then-boyfriend, 19-year-old Donnie Petrus, came to live with Diane. Loper often provided money to his friends, and both Chastity and Diane testified that Loper had often given them money and gifts. Diane stated that her relationship with Loper was like that of a granddaughter, and that he bought her first vehicle for her and paid the down payment on her house. The two also testified that in the time prior to Loper's death, their relationships with Loper had deteriorated. Loper disapproved of Chastity and Diane dating people with racial backgrounds different from their own. In July 1996, Diane, Chastity, Donnie, and Michael Northup were in Diane's trailer drinking alcohol, and some were smoking crack cocaine. Diane had no money to purchase drugs, and she and the other three present began discussing killing Loper. After some discussion, Donnie and Michael agreed to rob and kill Loper. On July 28, 1996, the four left Bay Street, Louis, and drove to Macomb. Using two knives they brought from Northup's house, Donnie and Northup stabbed Loper, who had been in bed asleep, 15 times and cut his throat. The two rummaged through the house but were only able to find $20. A few months after Loper's death, Diane inherited approximately $37,000 to $40,000 from Loper. The murder of Loper remained unsolved. In January 1998, police arrested James Stevens for some burglaries he had committed with Donnie, and he implicated Donnie in the Loper murder. When Donnie was confronted, he confessed and told police that both Northup and Diane were involved. Donnie pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Diane also confessed, pleaded guilty, and was sentenced to life in prison. Chastity pled guilty to accessory after the fact of capital murder and was sentenced to the Regimented Inmate Discipline Program. When Northup was arrested, a search of his trailer revealed a note, which was entitled "People to Kill," and listed several names including James Bryant, Diane's husband, and Lori Blaylock, Chastity's stepmother. Diane, Chastity, and Donnie testified against Northup at trial. Tamika dated Willie Hart Jr. for some years prior to 2001. Their relationship was toxic, you might say. There had been several incidents of violence between the two in the past. June 2000, Tamika assaulted Willie with a knife and was detained by the police but never arrested or charged. Tamika had pressed assault charges against Hart in two separate situations. They had a hearing on one of the assault charges scheduled for November 7, 2001, but it got pushed to a month later. Early morning November 8, 2001, the day after they were supposed to go to court, Tamika went to her friend's house, Quandra Lopez. While there, Quandra asked Tamika if she was going to let the police deal with Willie. Tamika said no, she was going to kill him. Tamika had a pistol on her when she made that statement. Sometime afterwards, she left the friend's house on her bike. Tamika and Quandra were not the only two present when those statements were made. A woman named Leanna was there, but she didn't hear it. Quandra told Leanna what Tamika said and told her Tamika had a pistol. Leanna tried to get Quandra to call Tamika's mother. That's when Tamika's mother called the police and asked them to look for her daughter, but she said she was concerned for her health because she was riding a bike while she was pregnant. Not long after leaving the Lopez home, Reed encountered Hart as he was exiting the home of his new girlfriend. A co-worker of Willie's was present and standing beside his parked truck with Willie when Tamika approached. The co-worker stated Tamika pulled out the gun as she approached the two men. Words were exchanged between Tamika and Willie, and Tamika shot Willie twice, killing him. Reed fled the scene but was quickly apprehended by police and arrested. Willie told his co-workers that Tamika had called him and threatened to kill him on November 7th. Several witnesses at trial who witnessed Tamika as the unprovoked aggressor in a lot of situations between her and Willie testified on the state's behalf. Tamika testified that she had not intended to shoot Willie but rather to shoot around him in an effort to frighten him away. She stated that she was afraid of Willie because of their history, and he was coming towards her with the intent to take away the gun and, presumably, to use it on her, so she fired. Tamika Reed was convicted of the murder of her former boyfriend. She is serving her life sentence in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. One Friday night in 2006, folks were hanging out at the Hurricane nightclub in Cleveland, Mississippi. Carlos White was there to meet his friend, Derek McKinney. The two men were hanging out when Jennifer entered the club and approached the men and started talking. Apparently, she was doing more than talking, enough to where her mother approached her and warned her to back off since her boyfriend was outside the club. Jennifer and Carlos had dated about 7 or 8 years prior. About the same time Jennifer's mom warned her, Damian Johnson entered the club, her boyfriend. He started cursing and grabbed Jennifer by her neck. He didn't say anything to either Carlos or Derek. Soon as the two men stepped outside the club, Damian began arguing with the men. Derek walked away, but Carlos continued in the confrontation with Derek. Damian punched Carlos. They started fighting in the club parking lot. The parking lot was dark. Witnesses said the only light that was showing was the light radiating out of the open front door of the club and a light that came from behind the building. Despite the darkness, Carlos's brother, Seagram Foster, was not too far from the fight. He went towards the fight to help his brother. Derek was heading home, but after seeing the fight, he ran back across the street in an attempt to break up the fight. After Carlos's brother joined, the witnesses claimed Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a small handgun. She was the only person with a weapon. She started shooting at the men. A bullet hit Seagram Carlos's brother in the back. Derek heard the shots and retreated from the group. However, he was struck in his chest and back with a .22 caliber bullet. Unfortunately, he died from the shot to his chest. Police never found the gun that was used in the shootings. The pathologist that did Derek's autopsy was not able to determine if the first gunshot wound was caused by the same gun as the fatal wound. Carlos and Seagram's mother said that Jennifer told her several months after the incident that she shot Foster, but that she was not responsible for shooting Derek. Police received reports that a man named Henry Taylor was also responsible for pulling out a gun and shooting that night. Investigators located Taylor. They tested his gun and excluded his weapon as the gun that was used to kill Derek. But the police were not certain if the weapon they tested was the same gun that Taylor had on the night of the shooting. Jennifer Weatherspoon was indicted on 1 count of aggravated assault for the shooting of Seagram Bacardi Foster and 1 count of murder for the killing of Derek McKinney. Following the trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict and the court granted a mistrial on both charges. Jennifer was re-indicted on the charges. At the conclusion of her second trial, the jury rendered guilty verdicts on both counts. The court sentenced Weatherspoon to serve 20 years for the aggravated assault charge and to serve a life sentence for the murder charge. Weatherspoon is currently serving her sentence in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. January 4, 2007, Patricia appeared at the home of an acquaintance, Mr. Pegg's, around 4 a.m., where her longtime friend Julius Wholesome was staying for the night with his lover Diane Ripley. Julius was married to another woman, Melanie Wholesome. Upon arriving, Patricia woke the two up. Patricia and Julius proceeded to smoke crack that Patricia had brought with her. She then asked Julius to come with her to Burleson Trailer Park so she could buy an 8-ball of crack. They left together, which angered Diane. When Patricia and Julius returned, Diane confronted Patricia. Julius asked Diane to leave, which she did, but angered her even more. She was riding around aimlessly when she ran into City of Pontotoc Police Chief Larry Poole. Diane told him of both Patricia and Julius's drug activities, giving the chief their location. In turn, the chief provided the information to another officer and a narcotics agent who proceeded to Peggy's residence. Now, at some point in the midst of all this, Patricia contacted Melanie and told her that Ripley was with her husband. According to Melanie's testimony, she went to work that morning, but being upset about the situation, soon left work and went to find Wholesome. She encountered Ripley on the road and followed her back to Peg's house. After another argument ensued, Ripley left. Melanie was outside on the porch of Peg's house when law enforcement arrived. Julius came out of the house, one of the agents searched him, found 2 knives and arrested him because of his prior felony convictions. He shouldn't have been in possession of any weapons. The officer then called for Patricia. She came out of the house, sat on the porch steps, and began to empty her pockets. Officer Rogers noticed a white object fall from her pocket onto the ground. Melanie testified that she, too, saw the white object fall from Patricia's pocket. Officer Rogers picked the object up and, noting that it looked like crack cocaine, arrested Patricia. Patricia and Wholesome were indicted by a Pontotoc County grand jury for possession of cocaine in an amount greater than a gram but less than 2 grams. The indictment only listed 2 prior non-violent felony convictions for Patricia. Therefore, she was only charged as a habitual offender, which carries an enhanced penalty of the maximum sentence of the charged crime. At the arraignment on June 29, 2007, both Patricia and Wholesome pleaded not guilty. The convictions referred to in the indictment regarding Patricia were a 1981 conviction for aiding and assisting Wholesome in escaping from prison, for which Brown was sentenced to 5 years, and a 1988 conviction for forgery, for which she was sentenced to 10 years. On December 12, 2007, the state moved to amend the indictment to delete the habitual offender language as it related to Wholesome, and he changed his plea to guilty. The court accepted Wholesome's plea to the amended indictment and sentenced him to 8 years in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. That same day, the indictment was also amended in open court proceedings to change the habitual offender statute against Patricia. This amendment was due to the fact that the state discovered, after Patricia's initial indictment, that she had a prior conviction for armed robbery, a crime of violence for which she had been sentenced to 20 years in prison. The amendment enhanced Patricia's possible maximum sentence for the current charge from 8 years to mandatory life imprisonment without eligibility for parole or probation. On February 26, 1988, Brown was found guilty by a Lee County Circuit Court jury of armed robbery and sentenced to 30 years in the prison. The sentence was later reduced to 20 years imprisonment. Brown was found guilty after a jury trial on April 9, 2008. Brown was sentenced to life imprisonment without eligibility for parole or probation.